The fluorescent lights hummed softly in the empty hallways of Techint Corporation's headquarters. It was just past 9 p.m., and the only sound was the gentle whirring of the vacuum cleaner pushed by a woman in her mid-40s, her work uniform neat but worn from years of use. This was her domain, the quiet hours when the suits had gone home, leaving behind their coffee cups, scattered papers, and the lingering echo of important meetings. She moved with purpose, knowing every corner of the 32nd floor like the back of her hand. 3 years of cleaning these offices had taught her the rhythm of corporate life from a unique perspective. What the executives didn't know was that the woman carefully wiping down their desks held an MBA from Howard University, graduated with honors. Life had thrown her some cruel curveballs, and here she was, working the night shift to put her 2 teenagers through college. Her dream was their future, a future where they wouldn't have to hide their brilliance behind a cleaning cart. "Good evening, Mrs. Thompson," the security guard called out as she made her way to the executive suite. She gave him a warm smile, the kind that reached her eyes despite her exhaustion. The guard was one of the few people who actually saw her, treated her like a human being rather than part of the office furniture. The executive floor was different from the rest. Plush carpets, wooden panels, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. As she pushed her cart past the CEO's office, she caught her reflection in the glass. She straightened her back, remembering how she used to wear suits not unlike the ones hanging on the coat rack inside. She'd applied for countless corporate positions here, each application crafted with hope and determination. But somehow, her impressive resume always got lost in the shuffle. "Not quite what we're looking for," they'd say, if they bothered to respond at all. So here she was, cleaning the offices she should have been working in. The night brought its own small victories, though. She'd overhear conversations about market strategies and think about how she would handle things differently. Sometimes she'd spot errors in financial reports left open on desks, simple mistakes that her trained eye couldn't help but notice. She kept these observations to herself, along with her dreams of sitting on the other side of those expensive desks. Her kids didn't know she cleaned offices at night. As far as they were concerned, Mom worked as a facilities management supervisor. It wasn't exactly a lie. She did manage to keep this entire floor spotless, didn't she? Besides, they were too busy with their own studies to ask too many questions. Her daughter was pre-med, her son studying engineering. Their success would be her redemption. Tonight was like any other night, or so it seemed. As she methodically worked her way through the executive floor, she noticed the lights still on in the main conference room. Unusual for this hour. The door was partially open and voices drifted out. She slowed her movements, not wanting to disturb what was clearly a late meeting. That's when she heard it. Fragments of conversation that made her MBA-trained mind snap to attention. Numbers that didn't add up. Phrases that set off alarm bells. Plans that made her stomach turn. She kept cleaning, her movements automatic while her brain processed what she was hearing. After 3 years of invisibility, she was about to become the most important person in the building. They just didn't know it yet. She glanced at her watch. 10:15 p.m. Just another night shift for the cleaning lady. But something had shifted in the universe, and nothing would ever be the same again. The executives behind those doors had no idea that their biggest threat wasn't their competitors or the market. It was the woman quietly pushing her cleaning cart, armed with an MBA and a moral compass that wouldn't let her walk away from what she'd just heard. The night air felt different as she packed up her supplies, her mind racing with possibilities and responsibilities. Tomorrow would be another day of being overlooked and underestimated. But for the first time in 3 years, she felt the familiar fire of purpose burning in her chest. They might see a cleaning lady, but she saw something else entirely, justice waiting to be served. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who'd ever been judged by their uniform instead of their capabilities. It was about truth, integrity, and the courage to stand up when standing up seemed impossible. As she signed out for the night, she couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the most powerful position isn't the one behind the desk, it's the one pushing the cleaning cart, watching, listening, and waiting for the right moment to change everything. The following week felt different. Every night as she pushed her cleaning cart through those familiar hallways, her heart beat a little faster. The conversation she'd overheard wasn't just office gossip or corporate strategy, it was something much darker. That evening had started normally enough. The cleaning lady was doing her usual rounds, making sure every trash bin was emptied, every surface spotless. The executive floor was quieter than usual, most offices dark except for that one conference room. The same one where she'd first heard those troubling words. She remembered how her hands had trembled slightly as she'd wiped down the glass walls nearby, trying to look busy while her trained ears picked up fragments of conversation. The CEO's voice was unmistakable, that confident tone she'd heard so many times in company announcements. But tonight it carried a different edge. "The merger numbers need to look better," he'd said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't care how you do it, just make it happen. Nobody looks too closely at these things anyway." The CFO's response had been hesitant. "Sir, some of these adjustments, they're not just bending the rules. We're talking about serious—" Did I stutter? "Make it work. There are thousands of ways to move numbers around. That's why we pay you the big bucks." She'd nearly dropped her cleaning supplies when she heard the figures they were discussing. With her MBA background, she understood exactly what they were planning. They weren't just tweaking reports. They were orchestrating a massive fraud that would make them millions while potentially destroying thousands of jobs. Now, a week later, she found herself paying closer attention to everything. The late-night meetings became more frequent. She noticed papers hastily shoved into shredders, whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. They never suspected that the woman in the cleaning uniform could understand every technical term, every financial strategy they discussed. One night, she was emptying the trash in the CFO's office when a crumpled spreadsheet caught her eye. Her hands shook as she smoothed it out, recognizing the manipulation of numbers that would fool any regular auditor. But she wasn't regular. She'd specialized in corporate finance during her MBA years. The cleaning cart became her cover as she started documenting everything. Her phone, usually used for pictures of her kids, now secretly captured images of discarded documents. She began keeping a detailed journal, writing down conversations, dates, times. Her years of being invisible became her greatest advantage. Nobody thought twice about the cleaning lady being present during their late-night schemes. But the weight of knowledge was heavy. Each night as she drove home in her old car, her mind raced with the implications of what she was uncovering. The merger they were planning would affect so many lives. Small investors would lose their savings. Employees would lose their jobs. Also, a few executives could pad their already bulging bank accounts. She thought about her own children, working so hard for their future. What kind of world were these corporate giants creating for them? A world where honesty meant nothing and greed meant everything. The same system that had overlooked her talents and abilities was now revealing its true colors. The hardest part was maintaining her routine like nothing had changed. She still smiled at the security guard, still carefully cleaned every office, still acted like she couldn't understand the complex financial terms being thrown around in her presence. But inside, her mind was like a computer, processing information, connecting dots, building a case. One evening, she overheard the CEO bragging about how smoothly everything was going. "Nobody suspects a thing," he'd laughed, feet up on his expensive desk. "By the time anyone figures it out, we'll be counting our millions on some beach." That's when she knew she couldn't stay silent. The question wasn't whether to act, but how. As she cleaned the fingerprints off his office window that night, she saw her reflection. Not just a cleaning lady, but a highly educated professional who understood exactly what she was witnessing. They had given her the perfect disguise, and now she would use it to expose their crimes. Walking to her car that night, she felt a strange mix of fear and determination. The path ahead would be dangerous. Whistleblowers often faced harsh retaliation, but as she thought about her grandmother's words about standing up for what's right, she knew she had no choice. The cleaning lady they'd overlooked was about to become their worst nightmare. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through the evidence she'd gathered. Tomorrow would be another night of cleaning, watching, and gathering information. But soon, very soon, she would show them that the most dangerous person in their company wasn't a competitor or an auditor. It was the woman they'd never truly seen, the one with the cleaning cart and an MBA, who was about to turn their world upside down. Sleep didn't come easy anymore. Every night after her shift, she'd lie awake, staring at her bedroom ceiling, the weight of her discovery pressing down on her chest. The evidence of corporate fraud was safely hidden in a locked drawer beneath her old college textbooks, but the responsibility felt heavier with each passing day. Her tiny apartment was quiet except for the distant sound of city traffic. Her teenagers were sound asleep, their rooms filled with dreams of future careers and success. They had no idea their mother was at the center of what could become one of the biggest corporate scandals of the year. She got up and made herself a cup of tea, the same way her grandmother used to when facing big decisions. The kitchen clock showed 3 a.m., another sleepless night. Opening her worn notebook, she reviewed her options for the 100th time. Going to the press was risky. They might not believe a cleaning lady, even one with an MBA. The police? They'd probably tell her to talk to the SEC. The SEC itself seemed like a maze she wasn't sure how to navigate. And then there was the scariest option, confronting the board of directors directly. Her hands trembled slightly as she sipped her tea. The memory of her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "Baby girl, doing what's right ain't always about doing what's easy. Sometimes the hardest path is the only path worth taking." Her phone buzzed. A text from her daughter about needing money for a new laptop for college. These late-night cleaning shifts barely covered their basic needs. If she went ahead with exposing the fraud, she could lose even this job. Her kids' education, their future, everything hung in the balance. But then she thought about all the other families who would be affected by the merger fraud. Regular people who had invested their life savings in company stock, believing in honest business practices. Employees who would lose their jobs while the executives walked away with millions. Her own struggles suddenly seemed small compared to the bigger picture. The next evening at work, she watched the CEO stroll past her, not even glancing in her direction as she mopped the floor. His expensive shoes left marks on her freshly cleaned surface, but she kept mopping, her mind racing. This man made more money in a day than she made in a year, and here he was, planning to steal even more. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photos she'd collected over the past week. Financial documents showing clearly manipulated numbers. Emails carelessly left on desks outlining the scheme. Meeting notes tossed in trash bins, revealing the careful planning of their fraud. Each piece of evidence made her position clearer. The security guard stopped by during his rounds, offering her a kind smile and a cup of coffee from the break room. "You're looking tired," he said, genuine concern in his voice. If only he knew what was keeping her awake at night. Back home the next morning, she watched her son pack his engineering books for class. He was so proud of his mother, believing she was making an honest living to support their family. Would he still be proud if she risked everything to expose the truth? Or would he think she was foolish for not keeping her head down and minding her own business? She opened her laptop, the same one she used to write her MBA thesis years ago. The cursor blinked on a blank document as she began typing out everything she knew. Her business education helped her organize the information clearly, building a compelling case that even skeptics would have to take seriously. Days turned into weeks as she gathered more evidence. The executives grew bolder, leaving more traces of their scheme. They never suspected that the woman cleaning their offices understood terms like artificially inflated assets and manipulated earnings reports. Their arrogance became their weakness. One night, as she was finishing her shift, she caught her reflection in the lobby's giant mirrors. She saw more than just a cleaning lady, she saw someone who could make a difference. The same determination that had gotten her through business school as a single mother was still there, burning in her eyes. She made her decision that night. The path ahead would be difficult, but she couldn't live with herself if she stayed silent. Opening her email, she began composing a message to the board of directors. Her fingers moved steadily over the keyboard, years of education and experience flowing into every word. "Dear board members," she typed, then paused. Everything would change once she sent this email. But as she thought about her grandmother's words about standing for truth, she knew there was no turning back. The cleaning lady they'd ignored was about to teach them the most expensive lesson of their careers. The next 2 months became a careful dance of gathering evidence while maintaining her cover. Each night shift turned into an undercover operation, with her cleaning cart becoming the perfect disguise for her real work. The executives never suspected that their late-night conversations had an audience who understood every word. She developed a system. Her phone was always ready in her uniform pocket, set to record any suspicious conversations. The regular sound of her vacuum cleaner provided perfect cover for getting closer to important meetings. She'd learned their patterns, which executives stayed late, which ones were careless with documents, and which ones were starting to look nervous about the scheme. One evening, while emptying the trash in the CFO's office, she noticed his computer was still on, spreadsheets open on the screen. Years of cleaning had taught her that executives rarely logged out properly. Her MBA training kicked in as she quickly photographed the screen, capturing clear evidence of the number manipulation they were using to fool investors. The security guard became an unwitting ally. "Ma'am, you've been working extra late these days," he'd say, bringing her coffee. She'd smile and mention something about wanting to do a thorough job. He never questioned why the cleaning lady spent so much time around the executive offices, making her job of collecting evidence much easier. At home, her dining table became an investigation center after her kids went to bed. She organized everything meticulously: photos, recorded conversations, copied documents. Her business school training proved invaluable as she pieced together the complex fraud scheme. What looked like random numbers to most people told her a clear story of deception. She created backup copies of everything, storing them in different locations. One set went to her sister's house, another to a safe deposit box. She'd heard too many stories of whistleblowers losing their evidence to mysterious break-ins to take any chances. The stress began to show. Dark circles appeared under her eyes, and her hands shook slightly when she poured her morning coffee. Her daughter noticed, asking if everything was okay at work. "Just busy season, baby," she'd say, forcing a smile. The guilt of lying to her children added to her burden, but she knew it was necessary to protect them. One night, she hit the jackpot. The CEO had been in such a hurry to leave for a dinner that he'd forgotten to shred an important document. Her hands trembled as she smoothed out the crumpled paper from his trash bin. It was a memo outlining the entire fraud scheme, complete with his signature. She carefully photographed it and placed it back exactly as she'd found it. The evidence was mounting, but so were the stakes. She overheard the CEO bragging about how the merger would make him enough money to buy a new yacht. Meanwhile, she cleaned the desks of employees who had photos of their families displayed proudly, families whose lives would be destroyed when the fraud came to light. She started noticing small signs that made her nervous. The CFO would look at her a bit too long when passing in the hallway. An executive assistant asked why she was always working so late. She had to be more careful. Her invisibility was her only protection. Using her business education, she organized the evidence like a professional audit report. Her small apartment became a makeshift office at night, with papers spread across every surface as she built her case. Each document was labeled, each recording transcribed, each photo annotated with dates and times. The hardest part was acting normal during her shifts. When she heard executives joking about how smoothly their plan was going, she had to resist the urge to reveal what she knew. Instead, she kept cleaning, kept listening, kept gathering evidence. Her grandmother had always said patience was a weapon if you knew how to use it. She practiced her presentation in front of her bathroom mirror, transforming from a cleaning lady into the business professional she truly was. The MBA vocabulary she'd suppressed for years flowed naturally as she outlined the fraud scheme. She knew she'd only get one chance to present her case to the board. It had to be perfect. The final piece came on a quiet Thursday night. She overheard the CEO and CFO arguing about the merger details in the conference room. Their raised voices carried clearly as they discussed exactly how they'd falsified reports to inflate company values. Her phone recorded every word, while she calmly vacuumed the hallway outside. That night, as she organized the last of her evidence, she felt a strange calm settle over her. Tomorrow would change everything. The cleaning lady they'd ignored and underestimated was about to show them exactly who she was. Her MBA wasn't just a piece of paper gathering dust, it was about to become the weapon that would bring down their entire scheme. The morning of the board meeting arrived with a mix of rain and nervous energy. She'd taken her first day off in 3 years, telling her supervisor she had a doctor's appointment. Her cleaning uniform was replaced by a crisp business suit she'd bought from a thrift store and carefully altered, a reminder of her corporate ambitions from years ago. Standing in front of her mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman staring back wasn't the invisible cleaning lady anymore. She was a business professional about to expose a multi-million-dollar fraud. Her hands shook slightly as she pinned up her hair, remembering all the times these same executives had walked past her without a second glance. Her daughter had noticed the suit that morning. "Mom, you look different today," she'd said, confusion in her voice. "Just a special meeting, baby," was all she could reply. One day, she'd tell her children the whole story. But for now, she had to focus on the task ahead. The security guard did a double take as she walked into the building's main entrance instead of the service entrance she usually used. She smiled at his confusion but kept walking, her heels clicking against the marble floor she usually mopped. The weight of her evidence-filled briefcase reminded her of her purpose. The receptionist at the boardroom tried to stop her. "I'm sorry, the board is in a closed session. You'll have to." "I'm the one who sent the email about the merger fraud," she said firmly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "They're expecting me." It wasn't exactly true, but she knew they'd read her email. The urgency of her message had guaranteed that. The boardroom fell silent as she walked in. 12 pairs of eyes stared at her with a mix of confusion and annoyance. She recognized them all. She'd cleaned their offices countless times, heard their conversations, seen their family photos. Now they were seeing her for the first time. "What is the meaning of this?" the board chairman demanded, half rising from his seat. "How did you get in here?" She placed her briefcase on the table, her hands steady now. "My name is Mrs. Thompson. For the past 3 years, I've worked as a member of your night cleaning staff. I also hold an MBA from Howard University with a specialization in corporate finance, and I'm here to show you evidence of massive fraud in your upcoming merger." A few board members smirked. Others looked uncomfortable. "You're the cleaning lady?" one of them asked, disbelief in his voice. "Yes, I am," she replied, opening her briefcase. "And that position has given me unique access to information about what's really happening in this company." She started laying out documents on the table. "For instance, these falsified financial reports that your CEO and CFO have been using to inflate company values." The smirks faded as she methodically presented her evidence. Photos of incriminating documents, records of late-night conversations, spreadsheets showing the manipulation of numbers. Her business education shone through as she explained complex financial concepts in clear, simple terms. "This document," she said, placing a particularly damning piece of evidence on the table, shows exactly how they plan to deceive shareholders. I found it in the CEO's trash bin, something you can do when people think you're invisible." The room grew tenser with each revelation. Board members leaned forward, examining the evidence with increasing concern. The chairman's face had gone pale. She played a recording of the CEO and CFO discussing the fraud, their voices clear in the silent room. "I've prepared copies of everything," she continued, her confidence growing, "including the evidence I've already sent to regulatory authorities and select investigative journalists. This fraud stops today, or everything goes public tomorrow." One board member tried to interrupt, but she held up her hand. "I've spent 3 years being ignored in these offices. Today, you will hear me out." The authority in her voice surprised even her. Years of suppressed strength flowed through her words. She laid out the consequences of their choices clearly. They could try to bury this, but she had safeguards in place. Or they could do the right thing, stop the fraudulent merger, remove the corrupt executives, and protect thousands of jobs and investments. "You might be wondering why I'm doing this," she said, looking each board member in the eye. "It's not for money. It's not for revenge. It's because someone needs to stand up for what's right. Someone needs to remind you that integrity matters more than profit." The presentation lasted exactly 1 hour. When she finished, the room was dead silent. The same people who had walked past her 100 times without a glance now couldn't take their eyes off her. She'd transformed from invisible to unforgettable in 60 minutes. "I'll leave you to discuss your next steps," she said, closing her briefcase. "But remember, you have until tomorrow morning to make the right choice. After that, the choice gets made for you." As she walked out of the boardroom, head held high, she felt decades of prejudice and dismissal falling away from her shoulders. They might have seen a cleaning lady walk in, but she knew that wasn't who walked out. Tomorrow, everything would change, not just for her, but for everyone who'd ever been underestimated or overlooked. The next 48 hours moved like a whirlwind. She'd barely made it home from the board meeting when her phone started ringing. The board chairman himself was calling, his voice urgent and respectful, so different from the dismissive tone he'd used just hours before. "Mrs. Thompson, we've called an emergency board meeting. The evidence you presented, it's even worse than you showed us. Our internal audit team worked through the night. The CEO and CFO have been suspended, effective immediately." She sat down on her worn couch, letting the words sink in. The same executives who'd walked past her like she was invisible were now being escorted out of the building. The cleaning lady they'd ignored had just changed everything. Had kids noticed something was different when they came home from school? Their mother was sitting at the kitchen table, still in her business suit, surrounded by papers and constantly ringing phones. "Mom, what's going on?" her daughter asked, worry in her voice. "Baby, remember how I always told you to stand up for what's right, no matter what?" She pulled her children close. "Today, your mama did exactly that." She couldn't tell them everything yet, but soon they'd understand why all those late nights had been worth it. The news broke the next morning. "Major CORPORATFRADXPOSED," screamed the headlines. Business channels were buzzing with the story. The company's stock had been temporarily suspended from trading. Federal investigators were swarming the offices she'd cleaned just days ago. She watched it all unfold on her small TV, still in disbelief. The CEO's face flashed across the screen as he was led out of the building, trying to hide behind expensive sunglasses. The CFO was next, looking nothing like the arrogant man who'd spilled coffee on her freshly mopped floors so many times. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists wanted interviews. Law firms wanted to represent her. But the calls that meant the most came from company employees, people who'd never noticed her before, thanking her for saving their jobs, their pensions, their futures. The security guard who'd always been kind to her caught her eye as she entered the building the next day. He didn't say anything, just smiled and gave her a knowing nod. She'd changed out of her cleaning uniform, but he recognized her anyway. He'd always seen her as a person, not just part of the furniture. The boardroom was different this time. No more smirks, no more dismissive glances. The chairman stood up when she entered, offering her a seat at the main table. The same table she used to dust every night was now where she sat as an equal. The scope of the fraud, it's staggering, one board member said, shuffling through papers. "If you hadn't come forward," his voice trailed off, "the implications clear. Thousands of jobs saved, life savings protected. A massive financial disaster prevented." The federal investigators interviewed her for hours. Her detailed records impressed them: dates, times, recordings, photographs. "This is the most well-documented whistleblower case we've ever seen," one agent admitted. Her MBA training had served her well, helping her build an airtight case. Word spread through the office like wildfire. The cleaning lady with an MBA had exposed the fraud. Employees who'd never looked at her twice now stopped to shake her hand. Some even apologized for not noticing her before. She accepted their words gracefully, knowing that change often starts with uncomfortable realizations. The company's stock would recover, the investigators assured everyone. The fraud had been caught in time, thanks to her. The merger was cancelled, but jobs were saved. The board announced a complete overhaul of company practices, promising more transparency and ethical behavior. Late that evening, she stood in her old cleaning uniform one last time, looking out the window of the executive floor. The city lights twinkled below, just like they had on all those nights she'd spent gathering evidence. But tonight was different. Tonight, she wasn't invisible. Her phone buzzed, a text from her daughter about dinner. She smiled, knowing she'd finally be home for family meals. No more night shifts, no more pretending to be less than she was. Her children would see their mother as she truly was, not just a cleaning lady, but a woman of integrity, intelligence, and incredible courage. As she packed up her cleaning supplies for the last time, she thought about all the other overlooked people in the world. The security guards, the maintenance workers, the cleaning staff, all the invisible people who keep businesses running while being ignored by those in power. Maybe her story would remind people to look past uniforms and job titles. Maybe the next brilliant mind wouldn't have to push a cleaning cart for 3 years before being noticed. Change was coming, and she had helped start it. One cleaned office, one gathered document, one act of courage at a time. 1 month after the scandal broke, she sat in her new office, still amazed by how life could change so dramatically. The view from the 32nd floor was the same one she used to see while cleaning, but now she watched the sunrise from behind a desk instead of behind a cleaning cart. The board's offer had come as a complete surprise. "We need someone with your integrity and business knowledge," the chairman had said. "Would you consider becoming our interim CEO?" She'd almost laughed. It sounded like a joke. But their faces were serious, respectful, even eager. Her first day as CEO, she'd worn her grandmother's pearl necklace, a reminder of the wisdom that had guided her through those difficult months. Stand for truth, her grandmother had always said. Now she was standing at the head of a company, proving that character and courage mattered more than fancy titles or expensive suits. The changes she implemented came naturally. First, she raised the wages of all support staff, the cleaners, security guards, and maintenance workers. "A company is only as strong as its foundation," she told the board. They nodded, understanding now what they'd been blind to before. She created a new company policy. Executives had to spend 1 day each month working alongside support staff. Some complained at first, but she stood firm. "You can't lead people you don't understand," she said. Soon, attitudes began to shift. Relationships formed. Respect grew. Her children's reactions had been priceless when she finally told them the whole story. Her daughter had hugged her tight, crying happy tears. "Mom, you're like a real-life superhero," her son had exclaimed. She just smiled, knowing they'd learned the most important lesson: never let anyone define your worth. The old security guard now sat at a nice desk in the lobby, promoted to head of building security. "You taught us all something important," he'd said when she gave him the promotion. "Every person in this building matters." She'd hired his daughter too, a bright college graduate who'd been overlooked by other companies. Her old cleaning cart sat in the corner of her office, a reminder and a conversation piece. Visitors would ask about it, and she'd tell them her story. Some looked embarrassed, probably remembering times they'd ignored their own office cleaning staff. Good, she thought. Change starts with awareness. The company culture transformed under her leadership. No more closed-door schemes or ignored whistleblowers. She implemented an open-door policy and created anonymous reporting channels. "Every voice deserves to be heard" became the new company motto. One morning, she arrived early to find a young woman cleaning her office. Their eyes met, and she saw something familiar in them, that same mixture of determination and dreams she'd carried for so long. They talked for an hour. The woman had a degree in computer science but couldn't find work in her field. By that afternoon, the woman had a new position in the IT department. "Never stop believing in yourself," she told her. "Your uniform doesn't define your capabilities." It felt good to open doors that had once been closed to her. The business world took notice. News articles praised the company's transformation. Other corporations started examining their own practices. She was invited to speak at conferences, sharing her story with audiences who needed to hear it. "Look around your office," she'd tell them. "Talent doesn't always wear a suit." Her old supervisor from the cleaning company visited one day, barely recognizing her former employee in the CEO's office. "I always knew there was something special about you," she claimed. They'd both knew it wasn't true, but she just smiled. The past didn't matter anymore. It was the future she was focused on. That future looked different now. The company's stock had rebounded, stronger than ever. Employee satisfaction reached record highs. The toxic culture of fear and fraud had been replaced by transparency and trust. People actually looked forward to coming to work. Her grandmother's photo sat on her desk, next to her MBA diploma and a small bottle of cleaning solution, symbols of her journey. "Success isn't about where you start," she'd tell visiting executives. "It's about integrity, perseverance, and the courage to stand up for what's right." Late one evening, as she prepared to leave her office, she caught her reflection in the window. The cleaning lady who'd been invisible was now one of the most visible CEOs in the business world. But more importantly, she'd shown that real change was possible. One person, standing up for truth, could transform an entire company. Her story became a symbol of hope for overlooked workers everywhere. But for her, the biggest victory wasn't becoming CEO. It was proving that character still mattered in the corporate world. That integrity was worth more than insider schemes. that sometimes the most powerful person in the room was the one everyone else had ignored. As she turned off her office lights, she smiled at her cleaning cart one last time. It had been her cover, her tool, and ultimately, her path to revealing the truth. Now it stood as a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that dignity comes from within, and that even the most overlooked person can change everything if they have the courage to stand up and be heard.